Good morning. Chochma and Beis, volume 3, page 1236. Aleph Reish Lamed Vav. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So yesterday we learned the last paragraph, the paragraph that we went over on page 1235, 1236 is tying it all together. That now that we know that Chochma, the experience of Chochma, is a far more bitteldika one, which means the individual who is absorbed in the Chochma experience with the divine. So the Amidas now are elevated to a state where they don't have even a sensation or any substance or identity, though they're there. Like we said, Chochma connects to his chalkus to distinction, but it's in the world of distinction, it's an experience beyond distinction, if you wish. In a world of shapes and structure, it elevates things to be absorbed into something greater than the structure. So Chochma is that interface between the structure of the spheres, which includes, of course, in this case, the emotions, and it's Chochma. It's not Binah. Binah is already the Mitzayir Tziyurim, shapes, draws images, creates structure. And in the cognitive structure of Binah, the midas are elevated and refined and directed, and not just raw emotions, raw impulses of their natural nature, but it's guided and directed and tamed and refined. And in Chochma, they actually go through a process of change. What kind of change? That they can rise above, transcend their very natural structure, the hatfa shalahem, to go above it and to change it, like we see by Avram, who was able to conquer and sublimate or subdue his natural tendency of love to his son and bring Yitzchak to the Akedah, which, as he said, comes from the level of Chochma. Yeah, Moichin the Abba. So even though Binah does come from Chochma, we learned the end of the page 1235, but when Binah is coming from Chochma, it's through the lens and through the experience of Binah, not Chochma. In Binah itself, he said there's a difference between the He, Chagas, and Binah Sheba Binah. In other words, Binah itself has different levels. Binah, as it relates more to the behavioral or to the natural, more to the emotional, and more to the cognitive within the cognitive. But Chochma is a level that's higher than all of that. Even the lowest level of Chochma is higher, he says, from Binah. Okay. And the last lines on page 1236 of the paragraph, he said, and especially when you're talking about the Atzmos, the core level of Chochma, which in Aveda, he says, is the Kavana Pnimi Shebemayach, where you have the inner intention of what is really the whole point of this idea. In Binah, the focus is on understanding it and internalizing it. In Chochma, the focus is on the higher truth within it, to the point of the Kavana Primis. What's the real bigger picture? The divine, not through the details, but the divine picture, like we said, the face, is in contrast to the specific details. And that creates a spilus etzem nekudas halev, but it's a spilus that is not felt. In other words, in Binah, you feel the sensation, as we had said. You can experience it, you can talk about it, you feel it very palpably. Where in Chochma, you're completely absorbed in the experience. And that's the tachlis ha'gadol v'apnimis dezah. So now we're talking about the ultimate maturity of the emotions, the theme that he began all the way back when he started the whole discussion about after Gan Eden. We said we'll understand this all. I'm talking now on the bottom of page. Where did he begin this? Bottom of page 1218, top of 1219, and then on 1221, where he went into Mudva Murgish Muskel, he's now concluding that structure, that Mudva Murgish Muskel. So now we're talking about the ultimate, the highest level the emotions can reach, meaning in the world of structure, obviously. So he says, what is that? Tachlis hagdola v'apnimi is the zosh me'irim boy. In it radiate the Gadlus hamoichin, the Abba. Not of Binah, but of Abba, of Chochma. And then the final line, this Hagdala is on Shabbos. this maturity level, this revelation is on Shabbos, and every day, more specifically in Shemoneh Esrei, as we learned. And he said, this is Iker B'chinas Muskel. This is the primary level of Muskel. So he talked about Mutva, natural, that's first concealed, like a Ibur, like in pregnancy or just a newborn child. We talked about Mutva becoming more revealed and more felt. We talked about how it goes into the stage of Murgish, where the emotions are even more expressed, and how it's also affected slowly by the Seichel, recognition, and things like that even at a young age a child has. And then as the mind develops and the emotions develop, they work together, you grow in Murgish itself. He talked about age to age 2, age 3 to 6, where a transaction, if they say yes, a yes is a yes, a no is a no, but it's still primarily on a very more natural and behavioral level, but there are actual feelings. And then the growth from age 6 to age 13, when you have the completion of the Murgish al pi ha-seichel, meaning the Seichel is impacting it, but it's not yet obviously Gadlus ha-meichen, because Gadol, the maturity starts at age 13. They went all the way to age 20, which is like the continuation or the conclusion of the growth of the mind. But obviously, we don't stop growing at 20 in our minds. There's a certain maturity that's reached. He doesn't explain exactly how that works from 20 and on, but then he moved into Moichin as first, the Moichin that is, you contemplate, not just, first contemplation how God is good for you, your life, your sustenance, chayecha. God is our Father. But it's still the natural emotions that you have when you love something that sustains you. It's in your subjective interest. Then we think the contemplation on God as he is not about serving you, but God still relating to existence. From existence, we come to realize godliness, that all of existence is nullified in his presence. Then we come to the level of God that's completely beyond existence, what he called Pnimis HaMeichin. The level before that was Chitzenius HaMeichin. Then he came to Binah, the level of Binah that takes the Midas to another level and refines them and elevates them. Basically, Binah is a form of Pnimis HaMeichin, I think. He doesn't really say it explicitly, but Pnimis HaMeichin is Meichin. And from that, I'm just looking at the flow. From there he said, after Pnimis HaMeichin, what did he say? Yeah, the Levush HaSoga, of course. The Levush HaSoga is Chitzenius HaMeichin, where you still have the garments. Then you have Binah, which is still somewhat connected to some handle, something we still relate to. And from Binah to Chochma, which is, of course, completely beyond, in a different level of experience, the Gadlus Abba. So we have Gadlus Ima, Gadlus Abba. These are all maturity levels, following all the levels I just spelled out before that. Yeah, at the bottom of page 1229, he spoke about Pnimis HaMeichin is this Bonanus. Okay. But in the level of the Haflah. Yeah, the Meichin becomes the Iker, the Midas Adem and Derech Memela. Just reading it, just making clear. And then on page 1230, he went into Gadlus Imon, Gadlus Abba. So in Binah, the Midas don't change. And in Chochma and Abba, they do change. That was the key thing, because you're going beyond their natural structure. So you really have a very, very organized, progressive order of maturity from the lowest level or the most basic level to the most mature level. And he concludes that that's the Ikar B'chinas Muskel. Though he said on page 1230 that Muskel is Ikar B'chinas HaMuskel, that the Eir HaMeichin radiates in the Midas, but obviously in Muskel itself, there's levels as we just learned. Okay. I was just wondering whether the Pnimis HaMeichin means that Binah and Chochma are both now on a level they're thinking about the godliness that's beyond existence, or even the godliness within existence, on a more mature level also evokes this state. It's not clear from the Mimer, I think. Whether we're talking in primis hameichin itself, or chetzenis hameichin is levushi asaga, so that's for sure Binah. I don't know if there's the Chochma there exactly. Chochma is not the dominant feature. Primis hameichin, where you're talking about the divine beyond existence, with the meichin not taking over. It would seem so. It would seem as we go in the meichin itself, as they go into deeper levels and higher levels, that's where the shift from Binah to Chochma happens. That's what it sounds like. In other words, is there a difference in Binah, Chochma, and Chetzenis HaMeichin? I'm sure there is. But I think the primary focus here is on the Primis HaMeichin. Meichin HaShayochim the Midas, and then there's Meichin that's beyond the Midas. I have to go over it again to clarify that, but okay. So now that we concluded this section, if anybody has any questions, please, now is a good time. Not, I will begin the new paragraph on page 1236 is where I'm up to. Yeah, he says it clearly. So even in Primis HaMeichin, they become sichlim, but they still don't transform and change. So clearly it looks like in Chetzenis HaMeichin to Primis HaMeichin, in Binah, and then in Chochma. Okay. So on page 1236, we begin the new paragraph. It goes like this. And now. So now that we've established this progressive state of growth and development, and we said this isn't just the biological growth and development, it's also an Avodas Hashem, the Avodah of the Neshama, as he said clearly on page 1225. Calls it Yuvan ben Neshama Lekis, Sheyesh ba Gimel Madreg is the Mutva Murgish Muzgul. So we're also talking about the Avodah of the divine soul. So now he's going to come back, because this is all part of the this is an operational plan. So he's going to continue in the discussion of, so how does this transform a person? He's going to introduce now some other ingredients into this equation, which is all going to come to the conclusion in around 20 more pages of a full picture of the Avodah of a human being on all levels, which will then lead us back to understanding what Gan Eden is, which of course is a result of our Avodah. So he starts like this. In order for there now to be Amshacha from this Meichin the Gadlus that we just spoke about, this mature mind, this developed mind in Zah, Tzarich li is yichud acher naila b'fnei atzmei. So it seems to be that he's saying that what we spoke right now was about how Chochma, the Chochma experience, elevates the person when they are absorbed into that level, that the Midas and all of them is absorbed in a level that's beyond sensation. You're completely melted into the subject, where the divine is, you're completely encompassed by the divine, so to speak, like a fish in water. But now comes the question or the discussion around drawing this into Zah. Yes, the Midas have been elevated, but now you want to be Amshocha into Gadlus, into Zah, which I will read on, but I would speculate and say that it means, in other words, it should be sustainable and it should become part of the human being, the Neshama's experience. Because what we learned till now could also be a one-time thing. Now, he doesn't say that explicitly, but reading in between the lines. We'll see where it's going to go. But he clearly is saying that in order for the Amshacha of this high level, in Tazah, you need Yichud Acha Naila B'fnei Atzmei. You need another Yichud, a different type of unification, Naila, a high level of unification, B'fnei Atzmei, separate from what we've discussed right now. In other words, we need one more ingredient, and that's what he's going to introduce now. Like he says in Eitz Chaim, Shar HaYiburim, Eitz Chaim is divided by gates. Gates are like chapters. So it's called Shar HaYiburim, the gate of pregnancies, to be literal. But obviously, Iburim means the gestation of the development of emotions. Remember, Ibur, Yunika Moichin. There's also a Shar Ibur, Yunika Moichin in Eitz Chaim, which he cited earlier. So there's a Shar HaYiburim. So he says there, because Eitz Chaim is obviously a encyclopedia from the Arizal on the entire Seder Ishtalshus, how things develop and grow. So Ibur plays an important role because Ibur, like it is in the human development of the fetus, the gestation period from the conception all the way to a full-blown child. So here we've been talking the same idea in context of emotions and emotional and intellectual growth, from a gestation from the Kuda, the seed, all the way through having a full-bodied experience. So he says in Eitz Chaim, he discusses Sheyesh Beis Mine Iburim. There are two types of gestations or two types of pregnancies. I don't like using the word pregnancy because right away elicits immediately we think a human pregnancy or physical pregnancy, but he means here is this state as a state of gestation where something is planted and then it develops. So he says there are two types. One is in order to develop the outer dimension of the emotions of Zah. Remember, Zah is the word used when we're talking in Atzilus. In Keiches HaNefesh, in the human faculties, it's midas, it's emotions. So Zah is like the midas of Atzilus. So he says, so you need one for the purpose of developing the outer dimension of Zah. From there is the source of where will come the angels and the worlds. In other words, from Atzilus, from the Zah of Atzilus, that from there will originate the development of Malachim that are usually in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, and Elamis, and the very worlds. But then there's something else. The second level of development or pregnancy, Beis, is in order for the development of the inner dimension of the midas of Zah, Shemisham Mokar HaNeshamis. From there is the source of the souls. Let me just explain this before we read on. What's the distinction between Malachim, angels, animal worlds, and souls? So going back to a theme that is a common thread in Ayin Beis in general Chassidus. But I want to say it through the story of Genesis, of Bereshis. It's easier to understand. You look at how God created the world. He didn't put the human being, the crown jewel, into existence until the sixth day on Friday. And the Gemara asked, the Mishnah asked the question, why not? If the whole purpose of creation is in order for the human being to come to refine the world and make it for a home for God, L'avda l'shamra, so the first thing he should have done is create that. You know, we're coming to Rosh Hashanah in a few weeks. When is Rosh Hashanah celebrated? Not on the first day of creation. Though we say Zeh hayom tchilas masecha, today's the beginning of your action, of your creation. We celebrate Rosh Hashanah. The creation was on the 25th of Elul. Rosh Hashanah is the sixth day of creation. We celebrate the birth of the human race, of the human being. So the Gemara, the Mishnah asks why. He gives two answers, but the main answer I want to focus on is because it says, gives an example. When you invite a special guest to your table, you don't first invite the guest and then you set the table. First you set the table and then you invite the guest. So God prepared the world. He set the table. He laid everything out. And now he brings his prime possession, so to speak, his prime agent is a better word than possession, his prime ambassador to come into this world and elevated as Adam and Chava were charged to do. So in the context of Seder Shtalshlus, that's the language of the Pasuk. Seder Shtalshlus, there's a whole structure God created from the Tzimtzum and the Kav and all the worlds. And then in later worlds, you have the concept of angels. They are divine agents, but not like a soul. They don't have free will. They're divine shluchim. They're like the ministers in the king's palace. So they fulfill God's commands. Like we see in Chumash, when God wants to send a message to Avram Avinu, he sent him 3 angels, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. One to bring the good news about Sarah giving birth, one to help heal Avram, and one, the bad news, to come to destroy Sodom. Each shliach has its role. That's why you don't give a shliach more than, each malach, which is like a shliach, can only do one job. That's why he sent 3. So a malach is directed, basically a channel of divine energy. So it's all part of the system. The neshama, on the other hand, comes from before the system began and enters to the lowest levels of the system and has the power to transform the world. A neshama, like we learn in Tanya, chelik elokam and mal mamish, or in the language of Chumash, tselem elokim, created in the divine image, has something unique. It's carrying the very core of the divine purpose. While the rest of the world, which includes the angels as well, in the spiritual worlds, are all fulfilling God's will, and they don't even have the power to defy this, like the clockwork of the sun rising and the moon rising, everything, nature, the balance of nature, and in the spiritual worlds, each one has its role. The neshama, on the other hand, it comes into the lowest levels, rooted all the way in Ola b'machshava tchila, as we learned earlier in Ayin Beis. The neshama is rooted in the deepest levels of the pnimius of Elokus, like he elaborates in Tanya chapter 2. Only the human being, only the Jew is called B'ni B'cher Yisrael, my oldest child, my firstborn. Bonim Atem, like a child of a father that comes from the very genetic matter of the father. So Malachim and Elamis, what he calls here, or the worlds in general, they are created by God, but they don't carry, they're not like a child of God, meaning carry the divine personality. They reflect the divine will, and they deflect different divine levels. Neshama has the ability to go and travel through all these levels, come down to this world, have the struggles and challenges and the free will, but has the power from the very divine power it's given into its soul to change the world, to elevate it. And obviously, God forbid, it could also destroy it. Malachim and Ilmas don't have the power to destroy, because they only do their job. That's all they have the power to do. Lo mishana tafkidam, he says in Tanya. They never change, they never waver from their role. You'll never see winter not come. The winter comes, followed by autumn, followed by spring, followed by summer, followed by the autumn. Trees will grow. Unless human beings get involved, the nature will always flow. The same thing in the Olamis and the Malachim. They do their job. When the Malachim came with complaints about the human race, the end of Parsha Bereshis, we know what happened. The Nephilim, God said, really? Let's see what you will do if you're put into this world. And as soon as they came to this world, they didn't have the ability. They immediately became corrupt because they didn't have the power of a neshama that has the ability to withstand corruption. But I don't want to go into the details of that. It's just an example. So when we talk in the language of Kabbalah and Chassidus, we talk about pnimius and chitzenius in this conversation. Like I always give the example, my example from Chassidus. You build a house. It has a chitzenius, the house, and it has a pnimius. The chitzenius of the building is handled by the architects and the contractors and the builders and the engineers and the electricians and the bricklayers. They build a building. You must have a building. But then there's the pnimius, the purpose of the building, the neshama of it, not just an empty structure. The purpose is to have a home for a person to live in. Or you talk about the Mishkan. Betzalel was the architect, and he built it perfectly. That was his role. Moshe was the visionary. What is the purpose of the Mishkan? To use the containers, the vessels, to serve God. the Aron, the Ark, the Menorah, the Mizbeach, the Shulchan, Mizbeach HaChitzon. So when you speak in the language of Kabbalah, like in the language here of Eitz Chaim, Chitzeni Zah is the outer structure of Seder Shtalshlus. And from there come the Malachim and the Ilmas. They're necessary. They're part of the, like I said, setting the table, creating a structured existence. They're also role models for us. They're not just servants and ministers, they're actually role models. They teach us things. And then the neshama is the real kavanah of it all. Rosh Hashanah is on the 6th day when the human being enters. In this case, the neshama, created with Selam Elikim, enters the picture, and he and she have the power to elevate it all, as Adam and Chava did on that first Rosh Hashanah. Boy, they called to the whole creation and said, come, let us gather and assemble and dedicate ourselves to God, our creator. Adam gave names to each of the creatures because he knew their deeper purpose, and on and on. And the rest is, of course, the whole Torah. So neshamas have that, they carry the inner code, the inner message from the creator of what's the purpose of it all and how do you elevate it and so on. So in the language of Kabbalah, this is Chitzeni Zah. The Ibur, the first Ibur, is the development of Chitzeni Zah, which is the mokar of basically the Malachim and Ilmis, essentially the structure of Seder Shtalshlus. And the second is for the Pnimius Zah, to create and develop the Pnimius of it all, of Zah, of the Midah Shemesham, is mokar HaNeshamas. And now he continues. Well, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything about what I just explained. Okay. Now, these are all more Kabbalistic terms. That's why I'm elaborating to make it more palatable, and the words that we can relate to. Now, this next line actually immediately brings to mind the first volume in Ayin Beis. Long discussion on this expression he's going to use now. I'll refer to it in a moment when I explain it. So he says like this. And these two levels is the difference between B'chinas Yichud Chitzeni Da Abba ve'Ima, the outer connection and Yichud and unification and fusion and joining of Abba and Ima, Chochma and Binah, is called father and mother. And the second is Yichud Pnimi, and there's an inner joining and fusion and connection, unification of Abba ve'Ima. So in volume 1, when he discussed the difference between Ir HaGvul and Ir HaBli, or in the names of Hashem, where he says in the beginning of Pasha Va'era, when he spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem says, I revealed myself to the Oves, to the patriarchs, with the name Shaddai. But Shmi Havaya Leina Daiti Lahem. I did not let them know, I did not make them aware, reveal to them my name Havaya, Yudke Vovke. What does this mean exactly? So in Ayin Beis, volume 1, long discussion on this, that Shaddai is the divine revelation. Shaddai, he explains there are 3-4 different interpretations in the word Shaddai, but one of them means die. That he says die, it's the power of limitation. Die means like dayenu, enough, die. Stop here. It's essentially the divine. It's connected somewhat to Shem Elokim and Shem Adnai, but he uses the word Shaddai. I'm not going to go into that right now, which is the divine the divine that manifests within existence. Now that too was compromised once Adam and Chava sinned at this tree of knowledge, and then worse, it only decelerated generation until Avram Avinu reversed the process. So what did the Ovis do? They corrected the tikkun to make Shem Shaddai radiate again properly. An example I gave then, I'll give it now as well. Think of it pipelines that God uses to channel his divine energy into existence. Yehi Yehi Rakia. We have a diverse existence. We need energy that enters, like we've learned, the divine energy, Mamala Kalalman, that enters and permeates, tailored to each part of existence. Now, what happens? Well, imagine now that these pipes get corroded, or rusted through sin and corruption and depravity and so on. So the Ovis essentially cleaned out these pipes and they returned them to the place they were before the Chet Eitz Hadas. But that's only cleaning the pipes and making sure that the divine that radiates, let's say that's traveling through the arteries of our being, that the arteries are not blocked and the flow from the heart, the circulation is in a smooth, seamless way. Then comes Matan Torah. Matan Torah is a chidush. It's not just cleaning up the pipes and the structure should be aligned. It draws a new energy that wasn't even there in the beginning of creation. So he says the first one is Yichud Abba ve'Ima Chitzeni. What he just said, Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Ima is what the Ovis accomplished. And Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Ima is what happened by Matan Torah. So now if you think about it, until Matan Torah, there was no real concept of a Jew, al pi halacha. Avram chose the path of godliness. But technically speaking, halachically, until Matan Torah, there was no real concept of Jew and non-Jew for that matter. That's why all the Jews had to go through a gear, a conversion. They went to the mikveh, accepted mitzvahs, mila, bris. We actually learned the laws of conversion from the events that happened in Matan Torah. So the real revelation of neshama, as we know it in the fullest sense, even though Adam HaRishon was created in the divine image and had a neshama and so on, but the real formalization, let's say, of the soul on this earth starts by Matan Torah when God gives the formally the Torah to the Jewish people. The Ovis also performed the Torah before it was given, but it was still informal, if you wish, and it was more spiritually. This is now Matan Torah gave the power to transform the world. I don't want to go too much a length discussion that goes back to volume 1. I just wanted to just associate this with what he says there to make it easier to understand what we're learning here. So the Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Ima, there's the Yichud Pnimi, which here is referring to essentially the two types of Ibur. One is the gestation, the development of the outer dimension, meaning existence, or the Seder Shtalshlus, the pipes I just referred to, the structure of Zah. And then there's the Pnimius of Zah, which is the Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Ima. Now he connects this also to what we learned earlier by saying, and delve into what it says elsewhere, from these two unifications or joinings, are the two levels of miracles that we discussed before on page 1231. Where he said remember the miracles that are manifest through nature, Nisim Nistarim and Nisim Niglim. And Nisim Nistarim, he referred to, was connected to Hatva, to nature. Yes, it's true, there's a miracle going on, but it's working with the laws of nature. That was Binah, affecting the emotions, but within the structure of emotions. And then was Nes, Nisim Gluyim, Niglim, Yetzim in Ateva Legam, and he said that was Chochma, Gadlus Abba, that lifts one up beyond the natural structure. So this is comparing, he said this is the two Yichudim. Yichud Chitzeni is like Binah, more Binah, even though it's Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Ima, but it's more Binah level. And Yichud Pnimi is the root of the Nisim Niglim, which is more a Chochma experience. So he just connects the two. We'll see, this will probably be relevant as this develops, but let's continue. Unless there's, again, if there's any question, I want to, because this is just very short, just using Kabbalistic terms, and without much explanation, that's why I'm elaborating more. But I think it's pretty clear. But if anybody wants any more clarity, just please ask. Okay. Then it continues. See, right now, he's brought two Eitz Chaims. One, the Eiburim, now is another Eitz Chaim. This is Shar HaZivugim. This is the gate of Zivug, of unions. Zivug is like a Zivug of a spouse. But here we're talking about the levels of Abba ve'Ima Zivug. And there's also Zivug Yichud Zun. I mean, there's different Yichudim and Zivugim. So he says, Perek Beis, chapter 2. What does he say there? The kasha yichud Abba ve'ima. When the unity between father and mother, which here means Abba ve'ima Ayin, Chochma and Binah v'Atzilus, who b'bchinas zivuga shalim, is a complete union. Shalom is union, like complete shalom. Oz then kol ikar mitzias azivug hu loses meichin gemurim the Gadlus el zunda atzilus lahelid neshamas chadashas. I'm going to translate that when the yichud is complete, means a full unification. We'll discuss what that means. I mean, on a physical level, you could say, you could have a spouses coming together intimately, but it's not a complete union for whatever reason. They're distracted or something. I mean, I'm just using a very physical example. Obviously, above there's no distractions. Or it's a complete union, completely seamless. So he says, when it's completely seamless, complete, something results from it. Then the Metzias Azuvuk, this existing union or Zivuk connection, what does it do? The entire union accomplishes this. Loses to provide moichin gemurim, the Gadlus, to give a complete mature mind maturity. Now here again, we're not talking about maturity as we understand it physically. Moichin the Gadlus means a very high revelation, like we said on Shabbos, a high revelation of moichin the Gadlus. Moichin gemurim the Gadlus. It provides an elzun to Zah and Malchus. Zun is Zah v'nukva. Zoyer ampin and nukva. That's zun. So Zah is the 6 midas and nukva is Malchus. That's Atzilus of Atzilus lohelid neshamas chadashas, to give birth to new souls. That's what he says in Eitz Chaim Shara Zevugim. That when the yichud Abba ve'ima is in a complete way, so the entire union provides this moichin gemurim the Gadlus to zun to give birth to new souls. And what's the contrast? We'll explain this shortly. I just want to read it. I will be yes azivug deloy shalom. But as long as the zivug is not in a complete way, ein koyach bezeh hazivug hatachten. This zivug hatachten, this lower level of zivug, does not have the power loses meichin lezun to provide this meichin, this infusion of meichin into zah v'nuk zoyer ampin v'nukva, meaning the 6 midas and malchus, rak b'seid yanika belvad, only in the form of yanika. Seid is an expression used often, even though it means secret, but it also means like the mystery or the doctrine. They say seid hatzimtzum. So it has a lot of meanings. But he says basically that only in a form of yanika. Now remember the word yanika. We had ibur, yanika, moichin. Ibur is pregnancy, where it's all still in a state in the fetus within the womb, spiritually as well. Yanika is the nursing stage. You already have something, a child, that's nursing. So there's something active. Moichin is full intellect and all the levels we learned. So he's saying that when the yichud, the zivug, is complete, so then you have moichin the Gadlus, gemurim, moichin gemurim the Gadlus, is being infused into zun to create new souls. When it's not complete, it does not have the power to do it in the form of moichin, only like a yanika, meaning yanika literally also means to nurse, but also like to, it's a what's the word I want to use, yanika? Not to wean, well, nurse is the right word. It means it's only getting a very narrow stream of energy. Okay. So clearly he's equating this with the two levels of yichud pnimi. Yichud pnimi da Abba v'ima, yichud chitzeni. Though he didn't say it explicitly yet, but he's clearly comparing the two. That pnimi is like yichud shalom, zivuk shalom, and chitzeni is yichud she'ena shalom.
Can you take a question now or no?
I'd rather wait.
Okay.
Because let me finish this subject, because it's literally in middle, and I may even answer your question if we read the whole thing here. I'm going to try to finish this section here. I want to see how far he goes. Okay, this is not short, but let me just go a few more lines just to tie it all up. So he says like this. The inyan zivug shalim, what is this inyan of a complete union? Hainu kisha Abba ve'ima shavim b'koy masan. So he's now explaining what means a complete union. That's when Chochma and Binah are equal in height. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean physical height. He means where they're both equally partners in this zivug. Because you could have a situation where Chochma, the Abba, is dominant and Binah is receiving, but you don't have them both in equal stature. So he says, and Zivug Shalom, besides being that they're both equal stature, also the Hamshacha comes from Chochma, the Abba, Shu'in Atzilus Sheba Chochma. In other words, what you're getting here is a complete experience. It's coming from Chochma, the Abba, not just Chochma, the Binah, which is in spheres, it's Atzilus Sheba Chochma. Because remember, in all the spheres, you have all the four worlds. You have Atzilus within Chochma. You have Bria within Chochma is Binah within Chochma. You have Yetzirah within Chochma is Zah within Chochma. And Asiyah within Chochma is Malchus within Chochma. Or Yasiyah, Malchus, right. Same thing in Binah. You have Atzilus Sheba Binah is the Chochma Binah. So he's saying, here we're talking about the highest level of Chochma. Atzilus Sheba Chochma, Ayin Sham Beis Chaim Perek Aleph. Look there in Eitz Chaim chapter 1. And here he spells it out. The Sham, the Zivug Shalom, B'chinas Abba ve'ima Eloyin. And there he says that the Zivug Shalom is this level of the higher Abba ve'ima. Shezeh b'chinas primis ve'atzmos Abba ve'ima. That's the inner and core of Abba ve'ima, as we're discussing here. V'sham, the Lahela Neshama is Hainu Neshamas Chadashis. And there in Eitz Chaim, he says specifically the same thing he said before, that this is the birth of souls, is meaning new souls. It's the highest level of revelation that's possible is new souls. Okay. So now he's going to explain the difference between these types of Yechudim. So if your question is about what's the difference between them, this is going to be explained. If your question is more about what I've read till now, please, there's a good time you can ask.
It's about what you read until now, and my question now is even more stronger than before. A couple lines up, he says when there's this zivug between Abba and Ima, at the highest level, he says, Ilah, I guess is what I'm looking for. It says Zun de Atzilus laholi neshamas chadashos. So he's saying it happens in Atzilus. And what you just read in the parentheses says that essentially this is happening in the Atzmus of Or Ein Sof.
Where does it say, where do you see Atzmus of Or Ein Sof?
It says Atzmus Abba Ve'ima. Abba Ve'ima. Okay, yeah. Well then, okay, sorry. So forget about the intensification of my question. My question, which was before even this, we just read the last part, is if the neshama is a chelek elokim me'al mamish, you would think that is from the highest level, from Or Ein Sof or bleep. Before the parsa, if you will. Have you learned
chapter 2 in Tanya?
I just finished it, the whole thing, okay. according to your Shiur.
So chapter 2, he says all souls originate from Chelik Elikam and Mal Mamish, and yet as they branch down or branch off, there are different souls. There are souls that come from the head, there are souls that come from the heel. So there's different types of neshamas. There's not a contradiction. They're all rooted in the highest levels. He's talking now the process of how the neshamas are created. Already, we're talking Atzilus now, not in the highest level. They're all rooted in the same place, but then they branch off. You even have neshamas that unfortunately can be even people who transgress, but let's not talk about that right now. So we're talking about neshamas as they branch, as we shall discuss as we go along. There are new souls, like the Alter Rebbe was a neshama chadasha. Most souls that come to this world are neshamas that were here already. So we're talking not where they are in their root. We're talking about once they're in the journey as they branch into and come into this existence. So there's going to be different levels of souls. There'll be new souls. There'll be reincarnated souls. But I'll discuss this more when we finish this subject and understand the difference between the different yechudim. Then we can talk about. Now, also at the end of the chapter, if you recall, he also talks about how parents have an impact. They don't change the very core of the soul, but they definitely have an impact how the soul will manifest.
The levush, right.
Okay. So bottom line is, it's not a contradiction that everything is rooted in one divine source. We're talking now as they're branching into different levels and how the different yichudim in Atzilus have an impact on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So like a neshama of a tzaddik, like he says, a neshama that's a reish, a leader. Let's take the Alter Rebbe, who's a neshama chadasha. So there you have to say that the yichud that led to that, I'm not talking about his parents right now, I'm talking about in Ruchnius, in Atzilus, was a complete zivug, what he calls yichud Abba ve'ima Ayin, or yichud pnimi, that brings moichin gemurim of Gadlus to give this neshama all that power. And then there's a yichud that draws a neshama, but it's more moichin diyanika. It's a lesser flow of the moichin of Abba and Chochma. Okay, so right now what he said, so two things. Zivug Shalom is when the Abba ve'ima, Chochma and Binah are equal in stature, and also that is coming from the highest levels of Abba of Chochma, Atzilus sheba Chochma. And now in the parentheses he added Abba ve'ima Ayin, which is the Pnimius and Atzmus of Abba ve'ima, and Sham, and again brings back the idea of Neshamas Chadash. I do want to correct one thing I said. Well, correct, qualify, but when I said Yichud, what he said before in volume 1 in Ayin Beis, actually was the expression there was Yichud Abba ve'ima Ayin and Yichud Abba ve'ima Tatoin. I believe he also connected it to Yichud Chitzeni and Yichud Pnimi. But there was Yichud of Abba Tatoin was what the Ovis did, as I said, Shaddai, and Yichud Abba ve'ima Ayin was Matan Torah did. So, but here he connects them, so good. Now he says the following. So what's the difference between these two Yechudim more in Chabad terms? Everything till now is like really technical terms that tell us about all these levels. But what's the meaning? What's the Havana, the understanding of this? So he says, ben Beis mina Yechudim hanal. The difference between these two forms of unifications, Yedua, the Yichud Chitzeni Da'ava, it's known that the outer unification of Abba ve'ima, Chochma and Binah, hu sham shochi hima'er shekvar nimdad b'seder ishtalshus. This is why I went back to volume 1. This is referring to the transmission, the amshocha, that's coming from the divine light that was already measured and tailored to seder ishtalshus. The aim is shum ischachus, and there's nothing new here. It's not a new energy that's generated through Aveda or some other way. God allocated, even before the Tzimtzum, we know Shir Asmei B'Koyach, he allocated resources, so to speak, which would then be transmitted through the Eir HaGvul of the Kav after the Tzimtzum, to create everything. He imagined it all, he envisioned it all, as we discussed at length in earlier pages, and then implemented it. So when you're talking about a yichud chitzeni of Abba ve'ima, you're talking about a yichud that's meant to draw and make sure that that energy that's there is allocated in the proper way, and channeled in the proper way. So what do you need the yichud for? If it's already determined, it's in order to take it from the concealed state into a revealed state. It's like someone, let's say, allocates resources to build a house. You still have to build a house, but the resources are there. Everything you need is available. And now come the different yichudim and joinings and fusions that access those resources. So there's nothing, I just want to add one thing to make it a little easier also to understand. I mean, for us, the best way to imagine, of course, Abba v'ima, Yichud Abba v'ima, is when we think about intimacy of a father and a mother, of our spouses, where they join as one, like one flesh, and then with God's blessing, they conceive. But I specifically didn't want to go there because first I don't want to bring it, we're not talking on our level here. We're talking how it's in its root. Yichud means when Chochma and Binah are working well together, so Binah is receiving what it needs from Chochma, which is the resonance, the truth, the sense of the keeping it honest and directed toward the Kuda. What is Binah giving Chochma? It's giving the elaboration, it's expressing it, it's comprehending it, it's fleshing it out. So when Chochma and Binah work well together, that's called a Yichud. A healthy mind is when Chochma and Binah are speaking to each other in a very direct way, and not one is dominating over the other. I say dominating, I mean that they're equally partners, so to speak. Shavim b'keimosam, as he says, equal stature. Just wanted to throw that in as well. So now he's saying, so the first yichud of Chitzeni is drawing down and revealing it from the concealed state, but nothing new is happening here. Aval yichud pnimi, when you say yichud pnimi, an inner yichud, that inner unification or intimacy, hu hamshachas chodesh mamish. That indicates or refers to a drawing a new energy mamish, literally new energy that was not there before. That wasn't there also in the mocker, when the resources were first allocated in the source of the hishtalshlus. Not only they're not there right now in a revealed way, they're not there altogether. It's like new resources, like you're generating new energy. Like it's written in Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe, Ba'abir, the V'nigdashti. This is in Likutei Torah Emor, Be'ikra. In the explanation of the Maimer called V'nigdashti, what does he say there? He says, the Yichud Abba v'Ima eina pirasham shachi ima Abba v'Ima levad. That when you have the unification of Chochma and Binah, Abba v'Ima, this does not mean that you're drawing only from Chochma and Binah. Ela Abba v'Ima mekabli mekeser. Abba v'Ima in their unification are drawing also from receiving from Keser, which is higher than Chochma and Binah. B'chinas arich ampin, the Keser ma'atik. From Keser, the lower level of Keser arich ampin, and Keser ma'atik ad ein sof atzmus hamaitza. In other words, you're drawing from arich, atik, and atzmus hamaitzel. Ein sof atzmus hamaitzel. So when Abba v'Ima come together, and the truth is, even in a physical union, what we know, it's not just father and mother or spouses are joining and they give birth to something. Their union connects them to God and the image in which they were created. Their union draws down the Yud-K, Ish and Isha, letters fire. They draw the Yud-K, which is higher than the man and the woman. And the same thing in Ruchnius. When Chochma and Binah come together, their Yichud allows a blessing or draws down what he says from Arich, Keser of Arich, Keser from Atik. Interesting expression. Keser b'chinas Arich Hampim, the Keser ma'atik. Keser. I think it should be read like this. They receive from Keser, Kama, which is the level of Arich Hampim, and Keser receives from Atik, meaning Arich Hampim receives from Atik, Ad Ein Sof Hamatzmus Hamaitza, till the infinite divine, the core emanator. So then why is it called Yichud Abba v'Ima? Umashanikra yichud Abba ve'ima, hu mipnei sha'agili ba'atzilus hu ha'idei Abba ve'ima. If it's drawing from much higher levels, why are we calling it coming from Abba ve'ima? So he says, because the Gilui and Atzilus is through Chochma and Binah, Abba ve'ima joining. Avla Esh and Imshach, but that which they're drawing down is from higher levels. Huma Atzmus Erein Sof.
This is the answer to my question. This is the answer to my question.
That's why I said we should learn on. I just stopped because you wanted to ask something.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Nothing to be sorry. It's usually
the yichud of Abba.
One second. Can I just finish? Let me finish explaining it.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So, umashanikri yichud Abba ve'ima hu b'pnei shagil b'atzilus ha'adei Abba ve'ima avle er shenimshach hu ma'atzmus erein sof. Yeah, but it doesn't answer your question because this is not yichud chitzeni. This is yichud primi. This is only neshamas chadashis. So, just for the record. But the point being here.
Well, that was my question. That was my question.
Okay. Okay. So we have two things going on here. He says like this, that there's two levels of the yichud. Yichud chitzeni is just revealing the concealed. Basically, what he said is that air that was already allocated, that's the yichud chitzeni. The yichud primi is a completely new level that's even more than the mocker of ishtalshus. And he brought for the Kutei Teira that the Amshach is not just from Abba ve'ima, it's going from Keser all the way to Atzmus HaMaitzil. And the reason why it's called Yichud Abba ve'ima, this level, is because that's how it's drawn into Atzilus. Through Chochma and Binah. If you didn't have the Yichud Abba ve'ima, those higher levels would exist, but they wouldn't exist in Atzilus. Now, is this an Er Chodesh or not? He's not explicitly spelled out yet. But let me just read. Mr. Ready? Let me just finish this a few lines here. Yep. Initial. So now he qualifies. So, okay. V'agam de yichud chitzeni da'ava. And though the outer unification that we talked about earlier, who gam kim me'erein sof shalamayla matzilus, that's also drawing energy from higher than Atzilus. Because it's from the Makar of Ishtashlus. That's only coming from the outer dimension of Ein Sof that relates to the worlds. If you remember, we learned that in Ein Sof, even before the Tzimtzum, God already, within the divine consciousness, created two tracks. One would be an Ein Sof that relates to existence, and one would be an Ein Sof that's beyond existence. So the Chitzeni, yes, also draws from Ein Sof, but it's from the outer dimension which relates to the existence. That which was already allocated or drawn to be a source of all of the entire cosmic order. And just I don't want to leave it hanging in the middle, so let me just read on. In the first root, what is that level? What's the first level? When God first arose in his will to emanate. That will immediately connects him somewhat, connects that divine energy level to existence. So it's what he rose in his desire, and it's referring to the level of Ein Sof that filled the space before the Tzimtzum Arishon. So there's levels of Ein Sof that we don't even say fill the space because it's not there yet. It's completely removed. And then there's a level you can say before the Tzimtzum, you have Ein Sof that fills that space. The Tzimtzum will conceal that, and the Kav, and then will come the Rishim of the Kav, and existence, Ishtalshus, will begin. All this, he says, all this is the outer dimension of air, not the previous inner, which is a source for a source of Ishtalshus. Why does he add a second mocker now? Because mocker Ishtalshus could also be lower levels, anything higher than Atzilus. He's going all the way to the Sherish Rishon, to the first root. So there's the mocker, but it's still called mocker lemocker Ishtalshus. But the inner dimension, the inner unification of Chochma and Binah, whom B'chinas that draws from B'chinas Primius v'Atzmas Ein Sof, from the inner and core level of Ein Sof Shalamayla Mebchinas Er V'Gili, that's higher than the revelation and the energy and the revelation, Gam B'Mokeh L'Mokeh D'Ishtalshus. Even that which is a source and a source for a source of the cosmic order. V'hu Hamshachas Ha'atzmos Ein Sof, that draws the core of Ein Sof, like the inner purpose of it all, not just the energy allocated. Like what I spoke before about Malachim and Elamis, is the energy that's already the product, but that's coming from an energy that relates to creating the structure of existence, which is the building itself. And Yichud Pnimi is going into the core. What's the purpose of it all? And fulfilling that purpose, that's Atzmus Dein Sof Shenimshel B'Pnimius Atik, which is then drawn into the inner dimension of Atik, Va'arich, U'B'Pnimius Abba V'Ima, like he said. So it goes, it travels, like the Likkutei Torah said, into Atik and Arich, and into the inner dimension of Chochma and Binah, not the outer dimension. And here I will stop, because he's going to continue. It's not over yet. He's going to go back to bring it into Chochma. But I think I'll stop here. Yeah. So we'll stop right here. Anybody want to ask anything? All clear? What's not been spelled out, and maybe he will spell it out, I'm sure he will. If not, I'll discuss it. The Neshamas Chadashas that he mentioned clearly is talking about something new that was not there before. Neshama that's not Chadash is like Chitzenius Zivug, the Zivug Chitzeni, because you're drawing something that was there, but you're bringing it into existence, which is most souls. And Neshama Chadash is coming from a place that he says here that comes from on the root of roots, higher than even the source of existence. That's what it seems like he's saying. He didn't spell it out literally, but by saying the newness, the Er Chadash clearly is the same idea as the Neshama Chadash. So that's why Neshamas themselves, as they are born in this world, you have the two types. The Neshama Chadash is much rarer, very uncommon, especially in later generations. And the Neshamas that were here already and come back again. But he's not talking so much what's on earth. He's talking about that which is created in Atzilus. What creates a Neshamas Chadash is new energies that weren't there before, and what is an energy that was there and is just revealing it and manifesting. That's what he said regarding that. Okay.
As it relates to the midos, that we were discussing the development of the midos up until this point, the past 18 pages, and in the question of how does one change one's nature, is it the idea that if Abba ve'ima ilin, meaning within Chochma and Pnimius Hamochin, if there's a yichud and it's shalim, it's complete, it's then the point is you can from that give birth to the new midos, not just a new neshama, but I'm saying using that as a metaphor, and that's already very complex.
Well, we'll
framework.
see. He didn't finish the subject. The Rebbe Rasha began saying that you need this new yichud acher naila. He said you need this. He's definitely going to conclude the subject. We're in the middle of it. This new paragraph came to add that in order for Chochma to impact the change of midas, we need another yichud. So he's in the middle of it. He didn't conclude the subject yet.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I'm wondering if it's really, is it changing the midas, or is it just giving birth to a new midah that replaces the old one?
Well, when we finish the subject, I'll answer that question. I can't tell you that right now. He's not there yet. We'll find out what he says.
Seems like he's leaning there, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I can't speculate without really reading till the end of the subject that the Rebbe Rashab introduced now.
Are there spheros above Atzilus and Zer
What,
Anpin?
what do you mean? Are there worlds above Atzilus, or are there spheres? What do you mean by spheres?
Well,
There are worlds. Every world has spheres. So
right, exactly. So my
you
question
know,
is,
let me just end right here, because you're asking something that's not about this moment. One second. Let me just stop here. So we're down close to the bottom.